Hey guys, Pascal here. There's been a lot of protests this year, both nationally and in Spokane. Despite escalation and harm caused by local law enforcement towards protesters, it's no surprise that automated license plate readers, or flock cameras, have been used to search for people who might have been at these protests. This week, both Erin's and Val talked about this on the show. Erin Sellers has been working on flock reporting for a while. Them and Val even did an episode on these cameras earlier this year, back in August. Recently, we've published two big flock stories. One about a Texas deputy who searched Spokane County flock cameras to look for a woman who had an abortion, and another about the Spokane County Sheriff's Office using these cameras to search for cars at various protests this year. We also have an upcoming story about protesters' rights and freedom of speech, so keep an eye out for that. You can find these stories, other podcast episodes, and more on our website, rangemedia.co. Thanks for listening, and on to the episode.
This is Erin Hedge. It's me and the other Erin Sellers, in the studio right now. Val's going to join us in a little bit, but she was in a meeting and couldn't quite make it on time.
Speaking engagement.
Yeah, I don't know
about,
what the meeting
is. Like free speech and journalism or whatever.
Oh, that's cool.
I don't know, something like that.
Val's a good talker on that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You're kind of wired. I can see Hedge just like bouncing his leg in the studio, and he kind of got sent out on something.
I think we both are a little bit.
Yeah, we're both a little wired. It's been a wild 48 hours, but your last 36 hours have been kind of intense. What are you working on? You want to share with the class?
Well, so I guess maybe we should kind of. It's been a little while since we've talked about the Spokane 9. Maybe we should circle back.
Yeah, that's true. Who are the Spokane 9, Hedge?
Let's go back to I'll try to do it quickly from the beginning. I'm sure we all remember June 11th, a famous day in Spokane when a bunch of probably several hundred protesters showed up at the ICE facility in Spokane on Washington Street, and to protest the arrest and pending deportation of two men who were here in the United States legally. And what happened was the former city council president, Ben Stuckert, who had a special relationship with these two men. He was the legal guardian of one of them, I think.
It was kind of like a sponsorship thing, guardianship for somebody who is 20, turning 21, and the day of his 21st birthday was June 11th, Stuckert said. So he gets like called in on his 21st birthday, and ICE is like, we're keeping you, actually.
Yeah, and not just keeping. They were gonna. It seemed they were gonna deport these two guys, and I actually don't know the status of their case or where they are right now.
I know one of them chose to self-deport after months in the Tacoma detention facility, which has received complaints for having potentially a tuberculosis outbreak. Just poor conditions. There was a story from ProPublica, I think, about the fact that like they were making these detainees do a bunch of labor in the facility and then paying them $1 an hour. So essentially like slave labor. Just not a great place to be. And it sounds like those conditions led to one of the two men from June 11th self-deporting. I don't know the status of the other man's case.
Well, so Stuckert Stuckert put out a call on social media saying, please come help me stop this from happening. Stop these two men from being deported or from being taken out of the ICE facility and transported over to, Tacoma. What people assumed was going to be the Tacoma ICE facility. Hundreds of people showed up. Many of them surrounded the vehicle that the men were going to be transported in and kept it from moving. People also blocked some of the exits from the ICE building. There were reports of slashed tires and paint being thrown on an ICE vehicle. It was it was a loud protest, but there wasn't actually any like physical violence against any humans. And for the most part, people stayed on the sidewalk. You were there for the whole thing. I showed up several hours into it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say two things. I saw the paint being thrown. There was paint that, or like I think it was a spray paint can. Basically, a guy rolled up on a bike, spray painted the windshield of the van that usually takes people to the Tacoma facility, got on his bike, and then wheeled away. And
so somebody
like,
who was just kind of like a drive-by vandal.
Yeah, and like organizers called the authorities and like called, I think they called the mayor and were like, hey, this happened. It wasn't really, like at that point there was less than 100 people there. And they were like, this person just showed up, spray painted, and left. They're not with us.
It was very early in the demonstration,
day.
Yeah.
And while I didn't witness any violence from protesters, I did witness state violence against protesters.
And against yourself.
Yeah, I still feel, I don't know, like my heart rate shoots up talking about it a little bit. But at one point, they were trying to like take a second van out of a lower entrance, and protesters caught wind that this was happening, sprinted towards that gate. I sprinted towards that gate to try to get footage of the moment, and all of these presumably ICE agents or contractors working with ICE, all masked up, came out and just started kind of indiscriminately shoving people, pushing them, trying to get them to move back from the gate.
And I remember in your footage, you're calling, I'm press, and they're shoving you around.
Rip my notebook out of my hand. I'm like standing as off to the side as you can physically get in a tight space like that.
You're just trying to bear witness.
Just with my camera out. Anyways, it was we were, I think, I was down there from like 1:30 p.m. until like 11. You were there from like 5 until 11. So it was a pretty intense day, and I think all of Spokane's been kind of dealing with the fallout from that for the last couple of months.
Yeah, and we, I think both of the stories that we're gonna talk about today kind of touch on this. But the one that I'm following is 31 protesters were arrested by Spokane police and Spokane County sheriff's deputies that day, and they were arrested basically on charges of just kind of like blocking public rights of way, so like local, like municipal.
And then there were two of those local charges, assault charges, 2 or 3,
and there were some assault charges, and that ran its cycle, and I think I don't know if they were all dismissed.
I want to say all but 1 or 2 were dropped.
Yeah, but surprise, surprise, several months later, it
was in like almost exactly 1 month later, right? Like in July.
The Eastern Washington U.S. Attorney's Office issued an order to arrest 9 of these people, some of whom were not even arrested on the day of the protest.
It was 4 or 5 out of the 9 people didn't even receive local charges.
Yeah, and they were charged. They were brought up on federal charges of. They were
conspiracy to
impede or assault officers and actual assault. And 2 of them were charged with actual assault. And the conspiracy is just like these people saw Stuckert's post on Facebook and responded to it.
The Facebook post was used in evidence as like, this is conspiracy. Yeah. It's like, okay.
Conspiracy is a big word to describe something like that. And these
are some of the first charges of their kind that we've seen. I think Val and I and you too, we were all like going through all of these other cities where protests against ICE were happening, and we could only find one other example of somebody being brought up solely on conspiracy charges. Usually it's something you tack on.
And that was a case out of like California,
it was a labor organizer out of LA who didn't catch any assault charge. It just caught a conspiracy charge. That's pretty like out of the norm.
So these 9 people were arrested. A couple days later in federal court, they all pleaded not guilty. But this week, we started hearing that these protesters and their lawyers had negotiated plea deals with the U.S. Attorney's Office to change their plea to guilty. And the first hearing for that was held yesterday. That was the case of Mickey Hatfield. Mickey was one of the people who were charged with assault. They had responded to the call, so they were brought up on conspiracy charges, and they were also brought up on assault charges for what they did was Spokane police had fired smoke canisters into the crowd, and Mickey took allegedly. There's video of this, but we should say allegedly. Picked up one of the smoke canisters and threw it back out of the crowd, and that's what allegedly constitutes the assault. And they had their guilty plea deal hearing yesterday.
And the reason we're still saying allegedly when they pled guilty is that these plea deals are kind of funky.
Well, and we're saying allegedly because like nobody's been convicted of anything.
Right.
So like we don't even know if there was a crime committed. But the government says there were crimes committed, and these are really interesting deals. I have before me the actual plea agreement for Hatfield. And I confirmed earlier today that all of the Spokane Nine have been in talks about negotiating nearly identical plea deals, where they changed their plea from not guilty to guilty, and then later on down the line in 18 months from their court hearing, where they enter the new plea, they will be. The federal government will change the charges to misdemeanor charges, and which dramatically reduces the fines and penalties for the alleged crimes. And so they have to, according to the folks I've spoken with, each of the people who are charged have to agree to this by tomorrow. Tomorrow's the deadline for them to agree to actually
go before
change
a
their
judge.
plea. They won't actually change their plea tomorrow, but they just have to agree to do so by tomorrow. It'll be really interesting to see if there are folks who choose not to change their plea. But Hatfield did.
And 3 other people have sort of tentatively agreed, and that they have agreed enough that there are hearings scheduled to go before a judge. Usually that doesn't happen unless you've told your lawyer, I'm going to change my plea, and then they ask the court to schedule a hearing. So one of the thing that I can confirm is one other person, Bobby Silva, is planning to change her plea to guilty. We think Ben Stuckert is also going to change his plea. And Colin Muncie is the 4th person that has a hearing scheduled.
And we don't know about the other 5.
Yeah.
So it was interesting in the hearing yesterday. The judge, who's a new judge, Rebecca Pinnell, I think she's been on the bench for about 6 months. She spent a really long time asking questions about these plea agreements that were filed, and they were like procedural questions. But she kind of repeatedly emphasized that, if people enter, if the Spokane Nine all enter or actually I can only speak to the Hatfield case because that's what the hearing was for. But if Hatfield pleads guilty, which they did, then nothing is set in stone. That doesn't mean that their charges are actually going to be reduced. The U.S. court, the district court, has to agree to that. The U.S. Attorney's Office has promised that they will, if the court agrees to it, they'll reduce the charges, but nothing's set in stone.
And And what are the conditions that Mickey has to follow for 18 months in order to get these charges reduced down from a felony to a misdemeanor?
They're basic, like local district court, like conditions of supervised release. So basically, among those things is you can't work for the federal government. You can't use drugs. You can't,
which includes marijuana, I think, even though that's legal in Washington.
Because marijuana is federally illegal. Things like that. Additional conditions are they have pretty strict like parole scrutiny. They'll have to check in with their parole officer for and it's the conditions of the supervised release are now in place, but they'll continue for 3 years after the sentencing if the U.S. court agrees to what the attorney's office has negotiated with the protesters.
Okay, so even after 18 months, if they plead down to a misdemeanor, these conditions would still continue for another 18 months after that.
No, an additional 3 years.
Oh, an additional 3 years.
They're currently under a supervised release, but they haven't been convicted of any crime yet. And so if they're convicted, then they get 3 years of supervised release. There's also an additional $100. It's some kind of fee that they have to pay. I can't remember exactly what it is. And then they have to pay collectively. They have to pay almost $11,000 in restitution. So
is that split between everyone who takes the plea?
Yeah. So like everybody will have to pay a portion of that $11,000, and they can pay it in payments. So it's like it's definitely a far cry more lenient than the penalty for the felony that they're charged with, which is up to 6 years in prison.
Yeah.
And $250,000 in fines, which is pretty steep. And also, it's just really bad for somebody's life to have like a federal like felony conviction on their record, because that makes it very difficult to get a job. It never goes away unless you get a presidential pardon. Like some states have arrangements where you can, over time you can have your record expunged. Federal cases don't have that. So it's stuck with you forever. And so there's like really, the stakes are high for these folks to accept the plea deals.
What are the consequences for accepting the plea deals? Like what are the potential, because we've talked about the potential negatives if they, fight these cases and then lose. It's a federal felony that follows you around for life. Mm-hmm. After talking to some of these folks' lawyers, going to the hearing, what do you see as the potential downsides for taking the plea? Well,
the court gets to decide whether it goes through. And the folks that I spoke with said that the courts will very, very likely honor what the U.S. Attorney's Office has negotiated with the protesters. And so it's a much better deal than what they had been facing, like, because I guess the uncertainty of whether they would win their case, because a lot of these folks they did the things that are alleged in the case. I mean, they showed up. They responded to the Facebook posts, and if that constitutes conspiracy, then a jury could definitely find them guilty, and they would have to serve. Well, they would have to I guess adhere to the consequences, the really steep consequences of a federal felony, and that's a really that's a heavy burden to bear. The interesting thing to me about this case is not because every indication that I've gotten from my reporting is that the United States court will honor these plea agreements, or the plea agreements. That's not the point. I think what's going to happen is the government, if everybody pleads guilty, will have a precedent to say, look at the Spokane Nine. They protested ICE, and they all copped to doing something wrong. And I think in the environment that we're living in, under a federal administration that is like really cracking down on immigration, and really bolstering its immigration enforcement capacities, that's going to be a really big deal, because anybody who does anything that is against what ICE is trying to do, will then be subject to, similar,
pretty weighty consequences. Potentially.
Yeah. It's a precedent. So it's not necessarily about the justice aspect of it. It's about the precedent they want to set.
So I guess be careful if you're saying you're going to a protest on Facebook.
Yeah, I mean that's what would be the case. It's going to be really interesting come tomorrow to learn whether all 9 of the protesters will agree to the plea agreement. If some of them go to trial and are found innocent, then that wouldn't happen, right? That would be, or at least there would at least be some nuance to the cases. But I think that's the point of these plea deal agreements is the U.S. government wants to set a precedent rather than pursue actual justice against the protesters.
Yeah, and I mean, when we look at who's prosecuting the cases, I know you wrote a story kind of about the attorney for our region and the changing cast there. And I know the spokesman broke some news about the old attorney who seems to want to keep things kind of vague, but left their employment right after being asked to prosecute these people. Hedge, do you want to... Also, Val has joined us in the studio.
Hi, Val.
You didn't turn her mic on yet. I'm trying to figure out which mic you're
Oh,
on.
thank you.
There we go. You can say hi now.
Hi, I'm Valerie. I just got back from speaking at Leadership Spokane. Hello to any new listeners who just learned about us through there, because I definitely talk to people about our podcast.
Wow. All right. Well, Hedge, you want to jump back in? I think we have a couple more minutes to talk about this story before we switch tack and talk about what I've been working on this week.
So, the current U.S. attorney for the Eastern Washington District is a guy named Pete Serrano. He's the former mayor of Pasco, Washington, and he had run for AG in Washington in the last election cycle. He's an interesting guy. He's locally interesting because he is representing, or he had represented, a worship pastor that we've written about a lot in Range named Sean Foyt, who is he's a self-described Christian nationalist who is very supportive of the Trump administration. I think it does make sense that Serrano was named to this office. His predecessor, Stephanie Van Marder, is the one who actually brought the charges against the Spokane Nine. But that was just she brought those charges, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was only a week or a few days before Serrano was announced.
And these have all been have any of them been confirmed by Congress yet? These are all kind of interim positions, yeah? Am I misunderstanding that?
Well, Serrano will likely be confirmed, but I think he's several months out from that process. I'm not totally sure exactly whether he'll be confirmed, but that hasn't happened yet. He's definitely seen as more permanent than Van Marder was. And Van Marder's predecessor, I'm actually trying to remember his name. He stepped down several months earlier, and you can talk about you talked about the spokesman breaking the news that he said he told them that
he was pretty vague in his language,
Yeah.
but like made some big LinkedIn post about like not wanting to make decisions that went against his values, and then like the next day the next day after he left, his replacement brought the charges against the Spokane Nine. So it seemed like he was trying to make as much of a point as he could without, getting himself in trouble.
I mean, a lot of folks think that suggests that there was like pressure from higher levels of the U.S. government to bring charges against these folks, which I think, if we're reading the tea leaves, that supports the case that what the United States government wants out of these cases is to set that precedent that
They want to make an example out of people.
They don't really care about what happens to the protesters. They just want headlines that say that they pleaded guilty.
Yep.
And they admitted that they did something wrong when they blocked ICE from trying to transport these two immigrants out of the city.
Yep. Well, stay posted for that. I know Hedge is going to keep following this rabbit hole. Tomorrow we'll have more news, and then I think there's a few more hearings scheduled for like Monday and Tuesday of next week. Or
Stucker's hearing is Tuesday or Monday, and I think
is it Muncie's?
Silva's is on Thursday next week, and I can't remember the date of Muncie's, but we'll see what they plead.
Tomorrow we'll see if anybody else is gonna take the deal.
We might hear tomorrow what these people have decided to do.
Well, okay. Not to continue to kind of be a downer about the state of the world and like protesters, but
let's talk about what you've been working on.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see it in my eyes sitting across from me, but I have been like neck deep in a spreadsheet that is so big I couldn't use Microsoft Excel. I had to get a special program from the internet called Row Zero that allows me to open a CSV file that has over 2 million entries in it.
What did the spreadsheet tell you?
The spreadsheet told me.
It's like reading tea leaves.
Kind of, except the tea leaves tell you exactly what they're doing most of the time. The spreadsheet told me that the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, which has about 60 flock cameras, 2 million, more than 2 million searches have been made on those flock cameras. I will tell you what flock cameras are, I promise.
All right.
So Flock is a brand name. It's like, everybody can have a phone, but like whether or not you have an Apple phone or a Samsung phone is different. Flock is a brand of kind of, I'm going to call them surveillance technology. I don't know that they would like that definition, but that seems like the most abridged way to talk about this company. And when we say flock cameras, we're primarily talking about automated license plate readers, ALPR cameras. These are placed on a variety of county roads, and the other ALPR cameras that are tied into this network are owned by like private companies. Like Lowe's has some of these cameras, and then they allow them to be tied into the county's network. So it's mostly on county roads, and then like a couple in Lowe's parking lots. And these cameras create this sort of blanket of surveillance. And whenever you drive past them, these cameras are just like constantly taking a video, basically, and they log, a blue RAV4 Washington license plate 12345 drove past this camera at 5 p.m. Here's a bunch of pictures we snapped of it. And it creates this giant database. I did not request that. I didn't request every single image that had been taken because I think that file would probably crash my computer. What I requested was, okay, so we've got these cameras and they're all taking these pictures. They're all logging this information. What information from this database is law enforcement looking for? So they have kind of a internal Google of these flock cameras where they can search for whatever they want. They're like, okay, maybe somebody got kidnapped and we heard that the person who got kidnapped was kidnapped by somebody that was driving a white Corolla. and they got kidnapped at 2 p.m. So we're going to search for any record of a white Corolla in Spokane County that was logged on cameras near the kidnapping around 2 p.m., like give or take an hour. That gets logged in it's called a network audit. And the network audit is supposed to give some kind of like transparency and accountability to how this technology is being used. So whenever a law enforcement officer searches for something on this internal Flock Google, it gets logged. And I wanted those logs. I wanted to know who's searching for what. You might think 2 million searches. That's crazy. This was a 6-month time period. How did the Spokane County Sheriff's Office search 2 million times? And the short answer is they didn't, because it's a Google system where you can say, hey, my friend in Texas, I will let you log into my Google and search on my cameras too. And so these 2 million searches came from law enforcement agencies, both local, statewide, nationwide, and federal, that were all making searches on our cameras. That's like as concise as I can think to explain Flock. Did that make sense to you guys?
It seems like it creates this window into what happens on Spokane County roads, that if the settings are loose enough, any law enforcement agent across the entire country could look into.
Yeah. Have you guys both seen Narnia?
Like the Chronicles of
Yeah,
Narnia?
like the Chronicles of Narnia.
My mom read me the books.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so like Narnia is all of this information that is collected. All of the law enforcement officers want to go into Narnia, and there is a door that you can get through to get into Narnia. And that door, there are different ways to get in through the door. So like the front door is like, hey, Narnia is saying you can come in. And that means you're on this direct list of people that the Spokane County has said can search their cameras. They gave me a list of all of the authorized users that have Spokane County login. So that's like 227 authorized users that they've said, like, this person can come into Narnia. We've said yes. They've got the A-OK to make searches on our cameras. Then there is kind of what researchers at the University of Washington call side door access. And that is, there's like settings that you can toggle on and off, nationwide lookup and statewide lookup. And if you have nationwide lookup toggled on, you're saying like anyone in the nation who also has a Flock login, they can just search our cameras too. And statewide lookup is the same thing, but for the state. So if you're in Washington, you're saying like, okay, Olympia police, you can also, anybody in Washington can search Spokane County cameras if those settings are toggled on and off. At least until June 23rd, those settings were toggled on. So those 2 million searches were coming from police stations everywhere, sheriff's offices across the country, federal agencies across the country that all paid for a subscription to Flock. Maybe they have their own cameras, maybe they don't, and they're just paying for a login. And we said, you're all good. You can search for whatever information you want on our cameras. We don't care. That's golden with
There were
us.
just no restrictions at all.
No restrictions. And it's really easy, it seems like, to basically, like, you're trying to solve a crime that happened locally, let's say, but, you know, it's really easy to just say, like, I don't want to just search my 60 cameras. I can search any cameras that have these settings turned on. I can search nationwide. And like maybe this white Corolla with a certain license plate, I'll learn stuff about other places they've been. Maybe I'll be able to figure out where they're headed. I might as well just turn that on and search all of these cameras for this white Corolla, even if I think they're probably in Spokane and they're probably in Washington. Might as well search Florida's cameras. And I think a lot of jurisdictions are doing that with our cameras too, is what the data is showing.
So you reported this back in August. A lot of this information.
Yes, a lot of the info on like where cameras are, how they work, who can maybe search them? ?
Mm-hmm. And what did you find in the last, I guess, week and a half when you started like going through this data from these records you requested?
Yeah. So back in June, I asked them to give me this sort of log. And again, it's 2 million things. So what I'm basically having to do is a bunch of like data filtering, keyword searching, like nerdy stuff. Like I am so in tune with the spreadsheet.
It's stuff that I don't have the patience for as a reporter, and Sellers has been obsessed, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And I mean, the big thing that I reported last week is that a cop from a sheriff's deputy, I should say, from Texas made a search back in May, and this search has been reported. So I don't want to act like I'm breaking the news that this Texas deputy made this search. Mm-hmm. But back in Texas, this deputy made a search that was had an abortion female. I think is pretty close to an exact quote. I wish I could pull up my headline quicker.
I think it's that's exactly
had an
what it is.
abortion, search for female. So this is what showed up as whenever you make a search, you're supposed to give a reason for that search, and that shows up on this log. We can see what search was made, by who, when, what cameras they were searching, what the reason was, if there's a case number associated with it, and any other information they chose to put in. So this guy just said the reason for his search was had an abortion, search for female. 404 Media broke the news that this guy was searching for somebody who had an abortion because that kind of reproductive care is illegal in Texas, but it's not illegal in Washington, and it's not illegal in many other states. And so this is where things get really tricky, because if somebody did something, like if somebody's a Texas resident and they go to Washington and they have an abortion, like it was not illegal for them to receive that abortion in Washington. If they had gotten the same reproductive care in Texas, that might have been illegal. But like this is where things get really tricky, and why states' laws are interesting when they are very different across states. And so this Texas deputy searched our cameras for this woman to see if she showed up here.
And to be clear, we don't really know anything about this person. Like,
we don't know much. We know that the sheriff's deputies were investigating. It seems like because they thought that she gave herself an abortion in Texas and then maybe fled, is what it sounds like they thought happened. Maybe she induced a miscarriage.
There was like fetal tissue left over and she needed to...
There's a lot of questions. What we do know is that they were... The Texas sheriff's deputies were looking into charging her. They were... trying to initiate a death investigation into the fetus. And they got told by the prosecutors there that basically like that we can't do that. That's not like a charge you can bring up. And when all of this news broke that this Texas cop was searching these cameras for this woman, they tried to say like, oh, we were just worried about her health. We were, we thought she was like maybe bleeding or like having a mental health crisis, and we were just really worried about her. So we were trying to find her.
A 2,500-mile wellness check.
Yeah, where we didn't say wellness check. We didn't say like mental health. We didn't say might be bleeding out. We said had an abortion in the search reason. But data that was later uncovered by the Electronic Frontier Foundation found that they were, in fact, interested in charging this woman with a crime for her non-viable fetus. And since then, actually, the county sheriff of the department that searched for her has been indicted on felony counts and charged with aggravated perjury for allegedly lying to a grand jury in a completely unrelated sexual harassment and whistleblower retaliation case.
It's interesting that they're fixated on a woman exercising her reproductive autonomy, and the same agency is like led by a man who's
been indicted on some charges.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's kind of the backstory. But what I found was that search showed up on Spokane County cameras. So we now know that technology that is operated and paid for by the Spokane County Sheriff's Office was used by
the Spokane County taxpayers.
Yes, the Spokane County taxpayers are paying money for this. Those cameras were used by a Texas cop trying to hunt down a woman who had an abortion. To me, that's pretty scary. It also, like Washington has these sort of shield laws that are supposed to keep our law enforcement officers from helping or participating in investigations for things that are legal in Washington, like reproductive care. The SHIELD law is like, we're not going to help you investigate or prosecute something that maybe is a crime in Texas but is totally legal in Washington.
The idea is that like Washington law enforcement agencies are supposed to dedicate their resources to investigating crimes that are like activities that are crimes in Washington rather than in other places.
Right. And this is like kind of a weird little loophole. Like no, Spokane County Sheriff's officers' time was used to help this. None of their, they didn't help investigate this. And it does turn out that the sheriff's office at least tells us that no hits on their cameras were returned for this woman. So she wasn't in Spokane. But we do know that our equipment was used in an investigation where they were potentially going to charge her. And so that's kind of like a weird loophole. This technology is developing so fast. It's pretty widespread now, and I think legislation is kind of behind when it comes to regulating this tech. And I think, honestly, in having some conversations with some law enforcement, it honestly seems like they maybe didn't even understand exactly the beast that they were dealing with.
Well, and I think one of the interesting aspects of this is this one case of this Texas deputy trying to hunt down this woman who'd committed who'd done something that was illegal in Texas in Washington State, possibly, allegedly, as we like to say. It would be really hard to quantify the amount of research because Spokane County leases their flock cameras from the company, and so and
then pays us. It's like a subscription model to operate the cameras and have access to the software. And
so, what portion of my tax dollar is going toward this one search? But you found that how much does Spokane County itself actually use these cameras as compared to outside agencies?
It's pretty slim. It was I want to say 100,000 of those searches, roughly 100,000 of those searches came from Spokane County, from SPD, and from Spokane Tribal Police.
In the first 6 months.
In the first 6 months. That's my record request spanned from January 1st to June 23rd. So we're talking about any searches that happened in that time period. And then some of those searches, honestly, a lot of them are there's an integration. I don't want to dive too far into the weeds on this, so please don't ask me questions about it.
It's very, very technical.
Basically, there's a integration that will kind of run these repeated searches for you to check the functionality of your cameras. And so a good chunk of those 100,000 searches are automation searches that are oh, we're checking the functionality, or oh, we're doing a test, basically. So not even all 100,000 of those searches made by our local officers are trying to solve a crime. And then you get into the weeds in another direction, which is that a bunch of these searches.
Can we just compare that to the number of searches that were made by other agencies real quick?
2,301,239 total searches were made on our cameras.
Meaning
110,067 of those searches originated from Spokane Police, Spokane Sheriff, and Spokane Tribal Police combined, and some of those are automations.
And what is the percentage?
Oh, Luke did the math. It was
5%,
4%,
4 point something. Yeah.
Yeah, it was small. So the vast majority of searches made on our cameras are not even for local law enforcement purposes.
And to be clear, we talked to the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, and they told us that that's no longer a thing.
Yeah.
To an extent, we're not sure exactly when it was turned off, but
that's been a whole separate thing. Yeah. We asked them hey, when did you turn it off? And they said May. And then we were okay, but here's all of these national searches from June. And they were well, May was an approximation, and we actually don't know when we turned it off, but it's definitely turned off now. And it was probably in the spring. And I'm June's not the spring. So when was it turned off? And they haven't been able to give us an exact answer. They do say that it is turned off now. I have another records request in that when I get that back will hypothetically tell us when did we shut the door to nationwide searches.
Sorry, I've been out of the newsroom today, but did you get a chance to talk to?
They did not call us back, so.
Funsies.
Yeah. We've got a lot of questions, and we've got 7 minutes left, and I will tease the story that's about to come out today, I think, because we are talking about protesters. One of the things I discovered when I was going through this massive CSV file is that there were searches for protesters. So if you went to a protest this year in Spokane, local law enforcement might have been looking for you. They might have been trying to get a sense of which cars were close to protests, who was there, where they were headed, what they were doing after. We don't really know because the only reason they gave in their search field was protest. We have a list of which protests they were searching for protesters at because the searches all have a date on them. So basically I can go see like, okay, what protest was happening on this date. It's very interesting to me because the one piece of policy that they have posted publicly is, or I guess they have 2 pieces of policy posted publicly, but they have this giant Spokane County policy manual. It's like hundreds of pages long. And policy number, I think 801, is about how the real-time crime center technology can be used. And these flock cameras are technically part of the real-time crime center. And it lays it out pretty clearly that the cameras and the tech cannot be used to search for people, quote, based on First Amendment activities. I don't know about you, but to me, going to a protest seems like pretty much the prime example of a First Amendment activity. Most, if not all of most of the protests on this list resulted in 0 arrests. I think there was one protest, the No Kings protest that happened the same day as Spokane Pride. Later in the evening, there were a couple of people who were arrested at that protest. So there were a couple of arrests in connection to that one, but like it's pretty stark. It's seeing these searches made. They were looking for people who were protesting Congressman Michael Baumgartner out at Whitworth, and the only incident report made in tandem with that protest was somebody who parked illegally. So I don't know that seems like a good enough excuse to use the flock cameras, especially when the second piece of publicly posted policy for how these flock cameras are used says that they cannot be used to search for traffic infractions. So
are they, and we can't tell from the spreadsheet whether there's like an associated crime, but just like the number of searches for protests suggests that they're pretty interested in the protests. Specifically
in the protests. And this isn't just a local phenomenon. We also saw officers nationwide making searches for protesters that also tapped into our cameras. And I don't know. I don't have a good sense of why, if there was any explanation for why they were making these searches, because so far the county has not provided answers to my questions, which I sent.
Well, and you know, we spoke with them earlier last week before the first story published, and it seemed, and you've heard the audio, you weren't there for that interview, but it did seem like they're a little on the back foot about like how they know these flock cameras have been used in the past. You know, we had a conversation with the Spokane County Sheriff's Office spokesperson Mark Gregory, who told us that he needed a lot of time to like really look into it, and it seemed like they just don't, like, at the upper echelons of the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, they don't really know much about their flock cameras.
Yeah, it's confusing to me because I'm asking a pretty basic question, like when did national lookup access get turned off? And we're not getting a clear answer. So it's like either you don't know, or you are obfuscating the truth, or you're just choosing not to share that information with the public. And neither of those 3 options are great. Like, it's a pretty basic question. When did you shut off national lookup access? You should know that about your surveillance tech. Would a search for a protest be a violation of policy? That's also like a pretty basic question, I fear.
Yeah, it's not. These aren't like complicated questions, and the data is pretty clear. And to be fair, like, you know, they don't seem to have the same data that you have.
Well, they should. It's a network audit, and they claim they audit quarterly, so they should be looking at the same data
Right.
I'm looking at like 4 times a year.
Right. So I spoke with Sheriff Knowles and the spokesperson Mark Gregory, and yeah, they seemed like they didn't really know about the data that you have, which is like, if it's an internal audit, they should have that information.
Which they told you that they do quarterly. They also told you that there has never been a Spokane County employee disciplined for a misuse of this technology. So, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of things in this file that presumably look like violations of policy to me. So I just don't know if those things aren't getting noted, if I'm misunderstanding, in which case I would love for them to call me back and explain why it's not a violation of policy, or they're just flying under the radar because these audits aren't happening or aren't happening closely enough. I mean, it's a ton of information. I get that. You're asking people to look through tons and tons and tons of searches, and that's kind of what makes this tech
and
so
not everybody
scary.
is as nerdy about it as you are.
Right, but like that to me is what makes Flock a little freaky. Like the sheer volume of searches that are coming in, and seemingly the lack of expertise on what's being searched for and when. It just makes it really hard to know, like, is somebody using these cameras to search for their ex-girlfriend, which happened in Kansas. I'm not, like, pulling that example out of thin air. If you're not regularly and closely auditing these searches to make sure that each search is connected to an active case number, you might never know if a search was somebody just like looking for their ex, or somebody making a search for, you know, a reason that is not related to their job. And these cameras are so pervasive. They're so spread out. They capture such a vast amount of information. And if we aren't being really careful about who's searching them, when, and why, it makes it so that misuse can fly under the radar and can kind of flourish under the cover of 2 million other searches that somebody doesn't have time to go through and make sure were appropriate.
You've talked in really like nuanced terms about this technology. Like, you're not a polemicist against Flock cameras, but like, or against
I can
like
see
cameras
uses
that,
for them. Like, you know, silver alerts, amber alerts happen. Somebody gets kidnapped. Your elderly family member like wanders off or drives off, and nobody knows where they ended up. And I can see wanting to check these cameras for their license plate number, see when the last place they were logged was. Like, I can see really valid uses for this technology. I just think that, at least for the last couple of years, because this stuff has been implemented since, I want to say the first contract was in like 2022, 2023 in our region. It just seems like people haven't been watching it closely, haven't been making sure it's being used appropriately. And now we're left with a data file for just 6 months that is too big to open in Excel. And like, how do we know if, you know, if all of those searches were for crimes like kidnapping, sex trafficking, looking for lost people, solving a murder, or were they for things that are against policy? Were they for things that make people less safe? Is your life better because these Flock cameras are here? Because my car was stolen and they did not find it using Flock cameras, I will tell you that.
I will say that when I was like digging through the contracts and stuff from the Board of County Commissioners, I think the county's current contract with Flock ends at the end of 2026. So that might be an opportunity for county commissioners or regular people to make a stink about it.
To reevaluate.
Like,
If we are going to have this technology, and again, there are valid uses for it, like if we are going to have it, what are the guardrails that need to be set? Who's auditing it? How frequently? Is there a way to make it mandatory that you put a case number, like a real actual case number, not just typing the number 1 or a period into the case number box?
It will be interesting to see how policy around how these cameras are used, or if they're used, will evolve over the next year, or like until the contract ends. And we'll have more data to request on that. And I will let you continue combing through that. That's a really gnarly project.
You're going to let me take the lead on the giant data files.
Well, you've also done just such an excellent job on this report that
you're
on these
one
reports.
with the spreadsheet.
Yeah. And I really have to give a shout out to our urbanism columnist Lauren Pangborn, who was the first person to be like, "Hey, you should look at these flock cameras. We should start digging into these." Anybody who's interested in this stuff should check out Flock Stories by 404 Media. The University of Washington's Human Rights Center is kind of doing a lot of digging into how these are used statewide. And the Electronic Frontier Foundation is also keeping a really close eye on this tech, these contracts, putting in public records requests to see what searches are being made elsewhere across the country. So I think if this has piqued your interest and you also want to start spreadsheet sifting, those are some good places to start.
That's our time this week. Free Range is a weekly news and public affairs program presented by Range Media and produced by Range Media and KYRS Community Radio, KYRS Medical Lake Spokane.
All right, catch you next week.
Bye.